Mesdames, Mesdemoiselles, Messieurs, bonsoir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the third webinar of the Forum of ICCC, International Catholic Center of Cooperation. The topic of this forum is metamorphosis of the world. How far can man change the human? What compass for education? In the two past webinars, we thought and reflected about the new opportunities, technologies for human being and the anthropological vision of human beings that is ever changing. We also propose some ethical reflections to think human beings as people that must be educated and not robots. Educating is the topic of today's meeting. Nelson Mandela said, and this is very meaningful, education is the most powerful weapon that we can use to change the world. Yes, today's youth is tomorrow's world. So artificial intelligence and new technologies always develop. And how can younger people continue constructing and building themselves and growing? Education comes from educare in Latin, that is growing and letting other people grow. We don't just let people grow as educators, but we also grow with them and through them. So the responsibility, this is the responsibility that we have. And in this word, responsibility, we have response. So this is an expectation, waiting. People always ask themselves some questions about the sense of their life, presence of robots and artificial intelligence, and well, waiting for a response. So we don't have the right to lie to them. And the answer that they wait for is a clarification on the world, on why they are there, so the reason for their presence, and educating them to become free. So yes, this is the responsibility as educators. So we have to help them questioning themselves and asking themselves the right questions. Levi-Strauss said, we don't have to find the right answers, but we must be able to ask ourselves the right questions. And today, a right question is asked to us in the era of artificial intelligence. Which educational orientations for the construction of human beings? Well, to introduce us into these reflections, I am very glad to let come on stage three important personalities and people that I would like to introduce. Marie-Hélène Parisot is a Quebec philosopher specializing in morality and applied ethics. She is an assistant professor at Laval University. She is the president of COMES, the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology of UNESCO. In 2021, she wrote The Robotic Society, Ethical and Political Issues, Herman 2020. Welcome to you, Professor Parisot. And I'm also very glad to introduce Eric Salobir. Good evening. You are a consultant to the Pontifical Council for Culture and Change in charge of media and digital technologies. You are the founder of Optic Technology, a network that strives to place the human at the heart of technological development. You are the author in 2020 of Dieu et le Silicon Valley, God and Silicon Valley, Boucher Castle as a publicator, a reflection on the ethical issues related to technological innovations. Welcome to you as well. Last but not least, this introduction will be done by Professor Sobita Will, and I am very glad to welcome him as well. You are the leader of the Future of Learning and Innovation team at UNESCO. You are also, in addition to the Futures for Education initiative, your recent research has focused on learning assessments with the publication of the promise of large-scale learning assessments, recognizing limits to unlock and unleash opportunities. Welcome to you as well, Professor Tawil. I would like to leave the floor to Marie-Hélène Parisot. You have the floor. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me well? Well, it is. I was the president of Commerce at UNESCO. Well, and I will talk about the initiative of UNESCO, the future of education. The International Commission on the Future of Education has submitted in March its report and talk about the reframing of humanism. So it's a new understanding of our interconnection and interdependence with environment. Then this reframing of humanism has also to be thought in terms of fast technological transformation and digital transformations, so AI in the educational model and digital technologies. I just have 5 minutes. What does this report say? Well, the digital technologies have some important threats for the diversity of knowledge, cultural inclusion, transparency, and liberty and intellectual freedom. These technologies have the capacity of generating well, a genius of human beings that was not conceivable up to now. And of the quote, some of new models are born, privatization of teaching and expansion of the international market of education with hyper-personalized methods. So will we go towards a tailored and privatized education model supported by AI and digital technologies? This is one of the possible scenarios if the population does not defend our education as a public good. I would like to say that luckily we have the pandemic of COVID-19. This is a bit sad, but we also experienced on a very large scale and without limits the remote courses in the primary and secondary level, but also middle schools and university. So we can now learn some lessons for the future of education. I would like to talk about 4 things coming from my readings. In spite of the efforts of teachers to adapt a remote pedagogy, we see that many pupils have difficulties getting the basic knowledge. In spite of scientific studies showing the advantages for children, the reality is different. They are demotivated, they are not engaged, and they are just telespectators of their learning. Third, well, about autonomy, well, a lot of pupils and students are not autonomous enough when it comes to spending a lot of time in front of the screen. Fourth, we see that there is a splitting in the relationship between teachers and the pupils in a remote teaching, and this has an impact on success at school. Yes, school is not a virtual, is a real environment. This physical environment is essential for having a relationship between teachers and pupils, but also between students and pupils in themselves. School is a place of socialization for people when it comes to making friends. And so digital technologies have allowed us to reaffirm the importance of on-site learning and the relationship between teachers and the pupils, but also school as a collective life place. So we should start thinking about this, school for everything as a common good. So does this question, well, what kind of place do digital technologies will have? What place should be given to computer science, digital technology, and the mathematics that goes with it in school learning? We have a lot of governments, for example, France and Quebec, for example, they are alarming of automation, growing automation of some jobs. And the conclusion that comes from that is since the labor market is transforming, then the government must follow this movement and must shift to digital technologies. So this is a priority of digital competencies and skills for mathematics and digital technology for algorithms for all pupils and students at all levels of education. So let's question this idea. A new question comes out. So should these be at the core of educational programs in which they become programmers and technicians of digital technologies? What stays of culture, history, artistic creativity, ecology to understand the society and the world in which people live? So we should question all this, the superiority of mathematics and the informatic IT literacy and the orientation of pupils in secondary school. Otherwise, what project are we talking about in the educational model? That's it. This was my introduction, and this was kind of a provocation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for introducing us into this webinar. I would like now to leave the floor to Eric Zellebier. Well, good evening to everybody. Well, the previous webinars showed our relationship with technology, bi-directional one. On the one hand, we produce it, and then the use we make of technology transforms us. We are produced by our products. So how can we make sure that this use of technologies make us grow in terms of humanism and do not make us renounce our capacities as human beings? Because we have laboratories, for example, in which we have a kind of maturity, but are we ripe enough and mature enough to use them? This is an important project for regulation of artificial intelligence issued by the European Union, in which they say that there is also a responsibility for users. And this is a meeting point between technology, the use of technology, and the public and an audience. Everything that is played around that. So we have to create a real culture of technologies, and in particular, a culture of artificial intelligence. I will give you an example. In the 90s, we had the mobile phones, everyone phoned in public spaces everywhere. And then little by little, we got used to these. We start using these technologies and we starting using them in a more reasonable way. We have to do the same with all technologies. So it will take some time, and the culture is a little bit delayed compared to technology itself. How can we set up this culture of technologies? I think we have to get some information on the capacities of technologies without seeing them as threats, but seeing them as something that gives power, something that makes us grow, for example. So through collaborative intelligence, or for example, access to knowledge and the capacity of mobilization of digital technologies, but they are not able, we are not able to manage, to master all this. We have to understand the limits of them. They are limited, and we have to use them for what they are able to do. An example, we know that artificial intelligence has always this tendency to reproduce some models, and this is a reproduction. Do we want to stay closed in a completely dark dimension? I'm not not sure. I think that social networks are not the right means to get some information. This is something just to share information with our people we love, people close to us. And then we also have potential risks in artificial intelligence. So we have amplification of mistakes of our society that were highlighted by the productive justice and all the algorithms that led to a lot of discrimination. And also there a good information can raise awareness and make a better use of technology. So we have to inform, and then we have to form, to train, but not just for technological things. We have to train younger people for the labor market so that they never compete with artificial intelligence, which is faster and less expensive, and it does what the human people cannot do. They have to be trained in art, in human relations, so that they can do what machines can't do, because machines will never be outdated. And then we have to form and inform, and we also have to educate to this to the full meaning of this word, to what UNESCO say. Educated to three things. First of all, to freedom, which is a right and also a duty. And I think that we need a critical spirit so that we are not manipulated by algorithms in these directions, in which we consume something rather than something else. We use a platform rather than another one. We wanted to respect our human rights and our private life. So education to critical spirit, and also education to relation. These technologies also transform the way in which we interact with the people that are close to us. We have to make sure that these interactions do not lead to consumerism in our life among friends, our private life, etc. All this must strengthen our relationships and it shouldn't weakness them. And then we also have to educate to responsibility. Emmanuel was saying that, because the responsibility is a key element in which we have technologies such as artificial intelligence that will make a lot of decisions instead of us. So these decisions are made by them, but human beings must stay the only responsible, the one and only responsible people. During this pandemic, we all hid this responsibility. Now we have to be aware of it, because other people are wearing a mask, and this mask shows their face. As Emmanuel Levinas said, it shows also the weakness of other people and the responsibility I have towards other people. The use of these technologies must help us strengthen our sense of responsibility. So just to conclude, I will say one thing. Well, I think that it is possible within this framework to offer young people this idea of learning to learn. So that's why we launched the Human Technology Foundation with the holy seat for preparing and training students so that they can develop in a world that is marked by artificial intelligence. I hope we will have the opportunity to talk about that and work together with all the people working around the UNESCO, so that we can make it as a thing like this. So thank you very much. Thank you for your introduction and for reminding us the three important objectives: the educating to relations, to freedom, and to responsibility. Thank you very much. I would like to leave the floor to Sobita Will. Professor, you have the floor to conclude this introduction. Thank you very much for your invitation. Well, a couple of things. I think that Eric Salobier has already anticipated something I will going to share with you. This is an initiative on the future of education of UNESCO, and also the idea of learning, of working together. So the objective of this initiative is not to predict very far context, but to have something new in this historical moment, in this point of crisis. and to know what to do in the future, for example, what is probable, what is likely, for example, for the future of our planet. So this is a vision, a very long-term vision that helps us to better act during this period. And on the base of that, this is a retrospective analysis and also prospective analysis. Well, we can recognize that we have a progress in terms of human development, in terms of reduction of poverty at a global level, the improvement of the quality of life, and also life expectancy, etc., etc. Access, extended access to training and education. But at the same time, we also know that there are multiple challenges that we inherit. So they come from the past, so more and more inequalities in all societies. So the distribution of richness and the COVID and all the impact of that, for example, and this has also polarization of poverty, so the gap between wealthy people and also extremism, for example, and all this. And this also has a negative impact on social cohesion, and the two transformations are very important, and they also characterize our moment. On the one hand, the intensification of a crisis, environmental crisis and climatic crisis, and then also the transformation, technological transformations linked to biotechnologies, digital technologies, artificial intelligence. So within the framework of this initiative, this is a kind of call to people to change their direction and to become, to have a sustainable future based on economic, social justice, environmental justice. And as Mr. Parisot has, Mrs. Parisot has said, well, we have to review our conception, our understanding of human beings, our conception of humanism. We have to reframe our relationships with other people, with the planet, with human beings, and with technologies. So, well, if you know the report of 1996, one of the ideas is learning how to live together. So this is the social dimension today, and well, we have to learn how to live together, live with other people, but also live with technology, for example. So we have to relearn our independency, and we have to figure out once again our role as humans. So education has an important role that it should play, and also sharing. We wanted to create shared objectives for better communities, for collective action. But education itself must also be transformed and transform itself. And in order to change the situation, it is very important to change also the function of collective functions and public functions. So we want to change course in a humankind, mankind. So this is societal effort, collective effort at a local level, national level, global level, with this interconnection and interdependence of our societies. And this also requires a shared vision, a better cooperation in front of common challenges. So we also have to strengthen public ecosystems of education, the idea of lifelong learning, and this is not something new. And then more and more this need for rethinking of this articulation between all the different learning spaces, well, formal, informal, social learning, cultural learning, professional, vocational learning. In this ecosystem, school stays central pillar, and Madame Perisot has said it. And well, some lessons can be learned from the pandemic last year. We have rediscovered the importance of public space represented by school, because school is not just education, it is also health, it's also food, protection, support. From the psychosocial point of view, education is more than learning. So it's not just about studying, it's collaboration, partnership, cooperation, all these aspects that are really essential for the development of civic skills and social emotional skills. So we have to protect our space and transform it. We have seen that there is a lot of food for thought, for innovation, and to encourage the use of technologies. But if we have found out something, is that this learning can be done also remotely, regardless of technologies. So digital technologies or traditional technologies, we have rediscovered the role of learning, for example, thanks to Mr. Salobir. And we also have to develop these skills in a collaborative way, also co-creation, shared projects. Well, in school, we have classrooms that work like this, but we also saw with the technologies, not just when schools were closed, we have seen that there was an aggravation of inequalities. We also saw the possibility of innovating in terms of programs, training programs, school programs, a lot of discussions about these more flexible educational experience that is more tailored, with questions that are not really dealt with. For example, safety, for example, data protection, for example, surveillance, etc., follow-up, etc. Well, apart from pedagogical questions, we also have a more independent and also digital commercial things and platforms, applications, etc. And it is important to recognize also this privatization and commercialization of information, of educational data, that also put some risks for acknowledgement, recognition, and education. This is part of our common heritage. So technology, well, we want to insist on the fact that technology is a means for education, for the goals of technology, digital technologies, AI. It must be means for education. So we have to conduct a debate, drive a debate with the stakeholders. So there was an excellent contribution to this public debate. So this is also inspires UNESCO, and we want to put these two dynamisms together with UNESCO. So on the one hand, we wanted to develop an international declaration on connectivity in education that goes beyond the matter of how making sure that connectivity is there, and also education, digital education in public space, so public education and to pedagogy without forgetting, as it was told before, the role that is played by relations and how technology can be used for relations, which is very important for educational experience. And the second aspect, also a recommendation, so ethics with artificial intelligence, and a recommendation which is a preparation, which is being prepared and which will be adopted during the general conference in November this year. That is everything. Well, thank you very much for this invitation and for this opportunity to share ideas with you. Thank you.
Professeur Sobitawil, un grand merci
Professor Sobitaril, thank you so much for your introduction. Thank you, Marie-Hélène Paviso, as well, and yourself for introduced very well to this introduction. And during your reflection, you said that education is a collective and societal effort, and we have to broaden the debate. And that's exactly what we're going to do now around this table. And I've got the pleasure for this roundtable to welcome 5 great individuals, and I'm going to introduce them to you before I give them the floor. First of all, I would like to welcome Professor Tanella Boni. Professor, welcome. Hello. Thank you for being there. You are in Abidjan right now, and you are poet, novel writer, philosopher, doctor in literature of Paris for Sorbonne. You're in Abidjan. You are president of the Network Africa, Philosophy and Democracy on the Aegis of UNESCO. You are the member of honor and member of the Scientific Council of the Study and Research Group for Globalizations, and you have written many books, among them one published in 2018 called To Live or To Reside. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to carry on by welcoming Nour Kilzi. Nour, you are a law graduate. You are from University of Cergy-Pontoise, a PhD student on the recourse by force by the states in international right in Lebanon. You are the member of the movement called Citizen Within a State, which strives to the creation of a laic, democratic, just and efficiency state. And you are a member of a Catholic movement. Be welcome. I'm happy as well to welcome Giorgini, Mr. Giorgini, Pierre Giorgini, be welcome. You are former Dean of the Catholic University of Lille. You are associate researcher of the same institute and member of Science and Faith. You created an engineer school. You wrote many books. Among them will be published in Bayer edition, Towards an Algorithmic Civilization, a Christian look on the ethics. And you wrote it with Father Thierry Magnan. I'm happy to welcome Roberto Lupi. Thank you for being here, Roberto. You come from Rome, from the LUMSA University, and you are philosophy researcher of law at the LUMSA University. You look at the concept of virtue and relationship between artificial intelligence and ethics. You collaborated with the Committee of Culture for the MP House in Italy and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And now, Laurent Bibar, professor, welcome to you. You're a philosopher and economist. You're a professor in the ESSEC school, to whom you are the chair about complexity, and you are consultant for the corporate world in the sectors of industry, health and energy, and for public institutions on the issues of change behavior, ethics, and help to decision making. So, in order to start the roundtable, I would like to give the floor to Nour Kilzi. Nour, I think you are very close to young people. You often welcome the questions of the young people when it comes to AI and new technology. Therefore, you carry the youth voices. Nour, what can you give? Which answer can you give to the young people? And about this question, what education can we give the young people to be, to really meet the expectations? And before I give you the floor, I want to say a few things first. I welcome the viewers as well, if they want to ask questions, to please express your questions and we'll put them to our speakers later on. And secondly, I want to point out that Noor Kilzi has problems of connections in Lebanon. Therefore, she so kindly did a pre-recorded intervention. Noor Kilzi, please go ahead in your pre-recorded. Hello, thank you very much for inviting me. And I followed the first two parts of the webinars, and I'm very happy to be here with you for this last webinar, which will cause one phase, but it's not the end of the discussion and of the debate. And therefore, in this world in metamorphosis, we were wondering about education. So from my humble experience and from my role within the international office and with the youth people or with the university in France, I found it relevant to start the reflection to see where are the young people now in this world of metamorphosis? How can they come out of these changes? What are their expectations? In order to talk about the young people or carry their voice, I talk with Lebanese and French young people outside the secondary schools or when they start universities. And therefore, my approach cannot be considered as sociological, but I think it's quite faithful to what the young people think. Therefore, I think it's relevant for the Lebanese and French people. We are not in a fair world, and they keep telling us that the COVID-19 has revealed inequalities between people. Therefore, in spite of inequalities, in spite of very different backgrounds, I found it interesting that when the young people speak, there are some similarities when it comes to their needs within that world and when it comes to AI. The youth, it's always hope, opportunities, futures. It's equivalent of all these, and they can build a great world. But nowadays, we can see that the young are in distress. Okay, we can think about students are quite poor in France, and in Lebanon, it's very, very difficult. And there are suicides as well among the young has risen a lot. Therefore, the young face an absence of horizon. And I would like to share with you something I talked about with a young lady. She said, evolution is not always good. You know, I'm fear about the values. How can I protect my values in this artificial intelligence world? She's not weak as such, and it doesn't mean she's resentful. She's a foreign student. She's a major in excellent student, and she makes a lot of effort. She wants her human value to be protected. So therefore, this overestimation of AI can cause the loss of values, and then the youth fear to be overwhelmed. So AI, okay, is great for advances and etc. It can help mankind to move forward, but as just a tool, it's just a tool. It's like a spear. It's an efficient tool. However, we need to know how to use it. So we need to redefine AI in its own limit. And it's not an ideology, but I think it's important from the scientific and the technical point of view for those who have developed them, the AI, they think about this. From this first consultation of worried young people, I will move now to the other challenge of the expectation of the young for education. And therefore, what is the part of the educator, of teachers? It's very important. Now, okay, in university, we are back to teaching, okay. However, dropout rates was absolutely massive, even before exams. a lot of absent students during exams or blank copies at the exams. So therefore, at university, normally education means more freedom, more autonomy, but however, it was very effective and it's very serious. And you can imagine that during this evaluation of the term, all the students said that they wanted to study face-to-face. Of course, this relationship, the relational side is very important with the teachers. And I think what I'm going to say is important for universities, but for education in general. The teacher is an authority figure, and as well that you can trust, but you cannot dissociate all this. About knowledge, a teacher, therefore, you could think that is very accessible. It's easy for a student to verify with a teacher if it's true or not, if he can trust it with the teacher. But there is a trust there. And therefore, the students think that he could have some authority when he asks some questions because he wants to test the knowledge of his own teacher. Of course, this accessibility to knowledge can be managed in a different way. A teacher can do it differently. He can lead his own students by initiating them. It's a possibility to really see the role of teacher, not that he has only all power and all knowledge, but that he can be humble as well about development of the reasoning of the students, about realities and the development of the real human intelligence. Okay, so this authority figure, this trust figure is very central about teachers. The young people have said it already. The central part of teachers, because he accompanies them, he will help them to protect themselves, to educate them. Another student told me, oh, it's great that they show us about programming, but they should tell us about social media. How do they function? How can we be protected from social media? To conclude, I want to say that the youth, although we are in the digital era, they are worried. Okay, I don't want to be negative, not at all, but the young, they feel very deeply the challenges. They say that they want that the teachers are really there for them. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Noor. To be the spokesperson for the young people, I like your confidence from the students that they shared with you. And we can see that the students, the young, have a lot of questions. Thank you very much for showing your reflection. Now I'm going to turn to Roberto Lupi. Roberto Lupi, I am convinced that what Noor Kizi has a great meaning. Yeah, there is no teacher without authority. However, the authority can be scary. It's synonym of strength and sometimes constraint. So therefore, Roberto Lupi, according to you, how can we rethink authority in relationship with the new technology? To you, thank you very much, Roberto.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak at this meeting. The topic I would like to address today concerns authority, new technologies, and education. Firstly, it is important to clarify my use of the term authority, especially in reference to education. In this regard, I would like to quote Jacques Maritain when he states that in educational work, adults must not make use of paternalism or imperialism towards children, but rather love and authority are required of them, meaning an authentic authority and not an arbitrary power. Children are entitled to expect from parents and teachers to positively guide them and to learn what they do not know. It is therefore a meaning of authority closely linked to that of authoritativeness. and based on an act of recognition. We rely on authoritative forms of authority to the extent that something more is attributed to them, a preeminence over one's knowledge or judgment. I would place authority within the category of relationship, a relationship between a fundament, a bearer of authority, and those who rely on the bearer. The fundament is to be understood as something that is perceived as profound and true. The bearer of authority is a person, for example, a teacher or a parent, or something inanimate, such as a text, a tradition, or an institution, which conveys the fundament. And the third refers to the people who come into contact with the bearer of authority. The role played by a priest in relation to the faithful is a typical example of the bearer of authority, but obvious distinction aside, a dynamic of this kind also takes place between teacher and pupils and in a wide range of other relationships. Authority therefore plays a fundamental role when the individual comes into contact with the word and is educated in it. At this point, you might ask what the relationship between what has been said so far and the topic at the center of our debate is. Well, my idea is that technology has given rise to a new mix between personal and impersonal forms of authoritative mediations. Let's take social network as an example. First of all, it is difficult to believe that technological platforms such as social networks play no role in the education of younger generations. Furthermore, the pervasive role of social networks in creating trends and behavioral habits and in circulating contents and information cannot be considered extraneous to the idea of authority. Within social networks, it is a new form of authority that arises. My idea is that this can be described as a hybrid form of authoritative mediation, partly personal and partly impersonal, based on three components, namely a person, a platform, and an algorithm. The person appears on these platforms through words, images, videos, audio files. These are simply fragments often flanked by an infinity of other fragments, coming from a multitude of usually unknown people. However, it is these very people to whom a significant proportion of public opinion turns, identifying them as authoritative authorities. I think it is necessary to focus on these last two words. I believe that in order to truly understand this new form of authority, we should add to the personal two impersonal components that justify the inclusion of some users of social networks within the category of authoritative authorities and not others. Of these two impersonal components, one places greater emphasis on the idea of authority, and I'm referring to the platform here, and the other on that of authoritativeness. And the reference here is to the logic of the algorithm. Allow me to explain. I'm convinced that the concept of authority mainly refers to the platform, social networks in this case. Today, the latter in many ways replace newspapers, radios, and televisions. They are deemed to possess authority and social relevance. Here, however, a new element comes into play in comparison to past forms of authority. I'm talking about the almost total accessibility of the platforms. It is this very characteristic which is able to potentially undermine the new relationship of authority at its root. In fact, normally the bearer of authority as being considered as someone or something that stands out from the crowd, as it is perceived to possess a privileged relationship with something deep and true, the fundament. It is precisely at this point that we arrive at the last component of the new form of authority of our technological age, namely the component that emphasizes the aspect of authoritativeness. I'm referring here to the logic of algorithms, which, once they have been implemented, allows some people and the content they convey to acquire an impressive degree of popularity and influence, sometimes overnight and on a global scale. If what has been said so far makes any sense, my next step should inevitably be to point out a highly problematic aspect of this new relationship of authority, concerning the link between the bearer of authority and the fundament. To be exact, I'm speaking of the crisis of the fundament, the mechanism for identifying the bearers of authority in our technological age appears to be almost completely independent of value judgments on the fundament. It is a mechanism mainly linked to consideration of popularity, heavily influenced by the logic of algorithms. Therefore, a phenomenon is occurring in which, in authoritative mediations, the emphasis is placed on the bearer of the fundament, who is often observed as unbound from the fundament itself, and with reference to the bearer of the fundament, the focus is oriented towards the impersonal and artificial component rather than the personal one. How might this trend be reversed? In my opinion, one possibility would be to bring what the philosopher John Rawls defined as reasonable, comprehensive doctrines back to the center of collective reflection and debate in order to rediscover their great social value. The reference here is to that multiplicity of conceptions of the good present in every society. They can be of a religious or secular nature, to be pursued individually or collectively, more or less demanding. But they are, for the most part, linked by the fact that they offer citizens a wide range of values, ideals, and purposes capable of rendering their existence meaningful. Rediscovering the value of comprehensive doctrines also means rebuilding the relationship of authoritative mediations with the fundament and restoring the social centrality which it seemed to have lost. Thus, the real challenge, I believe, is not to give value to pluralism as such, which often takes the forms of unrestrained relativism. Rather, it is necessary to focus our attention on the multiplicities and the related fundaments, all of which are admitted as long as they respect the rules of justice and reject any form of intolerance.
Merci Roberto Lupi de votre lumineuse réflexion. Je retiendrai 2 points.
Thank you, Roberto, for your thoughts. 2 philosophers that you have mentioned, first of all, is Jacques Maritain, and you said there is no authority without love because authority is a foundation of love. And the second philosopher is John Rawls, and you invited us to come back to the present to build again the relationship of mediation of authority. Thank you so much, Roberto, for this reflection that we are going to carry on for the roundtable in any way in exchanges with our public. Now, I would like to turn to the Professor Tanella Boni. Tanella Boni, thank you so much for being with us from Ivory Coast. So I think that the reflection that gave us Roberto Lupi makes echo to you because you have many bows, many arrows to your bow. You are rethinking education with the AI and new technologies. How can we remain human to be even more human while living together with new technology? We are very attentive. Thank you very much.
where I'm going to address Pier Giorgini. Well, education is a matter of intelligence, and I would say that intelligence is the basis of education. There is no intelligence without truth, and this is even questioned today. Well, how do you address this shift? How can we deal with that? So my speech will be held in 5 minutes. This was the rule of the game. Educating in the age of algorithm civilization, because with Terry Magnan, we are preparing a book towards a civilization of algorithms, un regard chrétien sur un défi éthique, so a Christian look and glance on an ethical challenge. To educate is to lead out, according to the etymology, out of what we don't understand or what we don't know and which is to be discovered, something we are scared about. There is an emancipation there. It is also the paradoxical idea of transmitting an ability to free oneself from what is transmitted to us, to free ourselves from our socio-economic, psychic, genealogical, hermeneutic, and genetic determinisms. In a word, in a nutshell, it is to equip each person to decide for themselves in full responsible autonomy the way they want to be in the world. For a long time, a rationalist or even scientist philosophical currents gave reason, including scientific reason, the primary place in the act of education, which became instruction. Intuitive knowledge, creative and artistic knowledge, or even spiritual knowledge appeared to be too easily permeable to forms of ideological or religious subjection. They were dependent on the subject, whereas rational knowledge appeared to be universal and objective. It was the triumph of the reason that emerged from the Enlightenment and plunged into the Socratic sources of truth and falsehood. The quest for truth through methodical doubt and the elaboration of concepts with universal scope, allowing the reading of the book of nature, which was thought to be written in mathematical language. Civic, artistic, spiritual, and moral instruction, and the belles lettres gradually became a supplement. Reason was then the spearhead of the economic, cultural, psychological, and social emancipation of individuals. But this conception exploded in the sciences themselves with the arrival of quantum physics, where the observing subject cannot be separated from the result of the observation. However, this ambition to develop reason, in particular scientific reason, which has been considered a priority for education since the Enlightenment, remains more essential than ever. For the algorithmic civilization is invading us. Algorithms and the digitized systems associated with them are flooding our daily lives, sometimes without our knowing it, as well as daily lives of engineers, experts, and scientists. Gradually taking control, they bring us to a new threshold in the history of knowledge. They are at the heart of the historical interactions between opinions, morals, religion, industrial arts, fine arts, and science, technoscience. In a word, at the heart of what defines a civilization. It is the act of understanding, that is to say, to elaborate a truth, or whether provisional, about empirical reality, including social reality, that is entrusted to algorithmic machines, often to assist men. But with AI and massive data processing, they are gradually leaving the state of assistance in the elaboration of knowledge by enriching the possibilities to take on that of an undisputable source of truth through the analysis of correlations and not causes and the simulation. This is because it is not subject to critical experience and develops models that are too complex and too fast to be understood by humans. The techno-economic pressure is then fully exerted on the acceleration of the passage to application before understanding. With the technosciences, we have moved from knowing to do to doing to know. With the new algorithms and digital systems, we are preparing to move to doing without knowing. We are in an epistemic revolution in the sense of Michel Foucault. Digital technology is freeing itself from mathematics. It increasingly allows us to read the book of nature without a mathematical understanding and even to write it physically in a machine-like conception of life. The complete delegation to the machine of the procedures it processes is dangerous for the day when algorithms are no longer content to act as programmable calculators, but develop real cognitive strategies that are non-neutral and cannot be confronted with critical experience. This is the transition from algorithms for assisted knowledge engineering to algorithms for driven knowledge engineering. This shift from assistance to control by algorithms is also true in the field of culture. The development of knowledge processed and interpreted by web algorithms, simply captured and repeated or inserted into an individual culture made up of heterogeneous knowledge networks woven from consultations on the web, without any real intimate understanding, without any epistemological unity, or even confrontation with the active criticism of the person consulting, is of the same nature and presents the same risks when faced with algorithms. A knowledge of links of a verisimilitude considered as truth or of similarities that have become equivalences, which loses its depth and immediately leads to a rapidly exchanged opinion, asserted without any real confrontation with critical experience and truth. It often triggers a catharsis of conspiracy or hatred. This leads to a collapse of the hierarchy of knowledge and the relativism of the notion of truth, even if it is always incomplete and provisional. But it ceases to tension argumentation and rhetoric as an ideal to be achieved. What is at stake is the end of the effort of truth more than the truth itself. The essential questions that we must ask students and the university community about this algorithmic civilization with its opportunities and risks are the following. What power, what exercise of digital power, what relationship to time, what freedom, what humanization, what place for giving and gratuity, what relationship with time, for free will, for fraternal co-elaboration, for solidarity, for emphasizing the privileged relationship with the smallest, the digital divide and questions of social ethics, the most vulnerable. We are here at the key points of Christian anthropology. In short, to read and understand what one reads, to write with richness and diversity, to count, to solve for oneself, to master the basic of logic, to know things about oneself without technical processes of memorization or interpretation, to think in an original way, not just in the wake of personal models defined outside of all rationality and evaluation, or of communities on the web. Reteach everyone to develop a true ethic of argumentation, and thus a posture of truth, discerning and developing one's own judgment through reason, of course, but henceforth not only. Indeed, neurosciences teach us today that isolating the exercise of reason from the rest of thought is a questionable reductionism, including on the biological level. The act of thinking and discerning is the result of a complex systemic interaction between different areas of the brain. Thus, intuition, imagination, creativity, immediate memory, deep memory, and archetypal memory, psyche, and spirituality are also at the source of all discernment, even if it seems completely rationalized. Moreover, new discoveries on neural plasticity and epigenetics lead to a more holistic view of the exercise of thought itself, influenced by and influencing the body on a biological and psychic level, including in a transmissible way. All this has the effect of reintroducing the subject as heir of one lineage and transmitter to the next into the act of thinking, of rising in consciousness. Moreover, the contemporary vision of systems tends to erase more and more the subject-object duality. Bruno Latour said that the subject becomes an actor network like the others, like the communicating objects of other natures, including technical. This pushed to its limits could lead to a flattening of the pyramid of the living, with the human being becoming an actor network like the others. It has with its own characteristics, but without a hierarchy qualified as anthropocentric. All in all living is being machinized to conform to the demands of the machines. Hannah Arendt wrote that more than 50 years ago. This indispensable re-internationalization of the subject in a global vision of the exercise of free will lead us to broaden the necessities of education if it is to truly prepare for emancipation and access to responsible free will. In fact, it is a question of helping each person to reveal all his or her talents, and not only that of logical rationality. The development of the person as a man in relationship who reaches beyond himself into the values that give meaning to his life, thus enters fully into the educational objective. Thus, this concept of integral education emerges, which opens up a new possible convergence with the Christian vision of man. The thesis of Emmanuel Mounier and the foundations of the social doctrine of the church are revived. Education in art, in wonder, in self-knowledge, in the rise of consciousness and spirituality, in social justice take on a new educational status. Thierry Magnin concludes our next book on the advent of the algorithmic civilization as follows: taking care of the spiritual dimension of every human being by promoting with great respect for this inner self, his or her integral development and expression is an indispensable key to a society's ability to intelligently choose the world of tomorrow. The great religious and wisdom traditions have treasures of life to put into the common pot of our humanity in search of meaning, so that we can take up each in our own way the prayer of the psalmist, full of gratitude to God. You have set me free, educere. It is the freedom, this horizon of the open sea that we need worldwide. The spiritual educates the biological psychic of the evolution of the living from survival to life, from fear of slavery to freedom, from failure to renewal. I will end with this quotation from Henry Bergson. Bergson's Two Sources of Morality and the Religion in its chapter 4 on mechanics and mysticism. Machines with Stigler, that disappeared with Stigler. Machines have come to give our organism an extension so vast and a power so formidable, so disproportionate to its size and strength, that surely nothing of the kind had been foreseen in the structural plan of our species. Now, in this disproportionately enlarged body, the soul remains what it was, too small now to feel it, too weak to direct it. New reserves of potential energy, this time moral, are needed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Giorgiani, for this insightful speech. There is a very important aspect you highlighted, well, reflecting to enlarge the horizons of education, and you also invited every person to enlarge that, because there is a relationship of what you call integral education. We have to take care of the spiritual dimension of each human being, which is the key to understand the worlds of tomorrow, with Thierry Magnin, the conclusion of your book that will be published in September. To conclude this round table, I would like to conclude with Laurent Bibard. Well, we can't stop there, because every question has a solution, but there is no solution without us reflecting upon our questioning. this is the question of problematization. Laurent Bibard, you have the floor. Thank you for being here.
C'est un honneur, un plaisir et un honneur de participer à cette table ronde et à l'ensemble de la réflexion.
Thank you to you. It's great to take part to this discussion with you and to this debate. There's a great richness to everything which has been said already, and I just want to address a few points. And since we started with this term, I will start with this to say this. I believe that around the notion of AI, there are questions of power, which are very important. And Roberto Lupi talked about authority, but I think it's a question of power on three levels. First of all, it's around what we would call the transhumanism, and I will get there, concerning the desire, which is a fantasy of going beyond the human intelligence into the AI. Secondly, it's about the way we relate to it, to technologies. We talked about it already. It's important to get back to that in different ways. And the third point, which has already been studied, it is in relationship with the big data. So the 3 points are the following. The first of all is about the AI, which is supposed to go beyond the human intelligence. This is one of the objectives or one of the dreams of transhumanism. Well, it's very important to keep in mind that the notion of intelligence, artificial intelligence, is meaningless. What the machines do, what robots do, what computers do, what algorithms do, and it's back to the solution notion, is just to find solutions. Machines allow us in a very efficient way, which is beyond our own human power, to find solutions. Machines are calculators, and they have combination calculations, but there is no skill as such for these machines. There is a problematization by a machine. The machine never asks themselves any questions. They do not problematize reality. They do not prioritize anything in the strong sense. So those who leave questions of meaning are human beings. And there is always a possible nonsense. So nowadays, we're saturated with solution proposals. We don't even know which problems it's about. And it's an economic imperative which causes us to find solutions again and again. Indeed, we need solutions. However, there is another fundamental need to know which problem should we solve and why. And this is specifically human. So if intelligence there is, it's specifically human, and it's about our capacity to ask the question of meaning. On the foundation of this body that Tanela Boni talked about, we are a body. And from this body, in this finite world, in this life, which is finite, we can ask ourselves about our priorities and the meaning of life and the time of our lives. So to dream of immortality has no sense. Okay, power of influence. Transhumanism is very, very important, to the point that institutional authorities use them for the question of transhumanism. It's completely false, I believe. We need to take away transhumanism, the aura that it took. There is no question of transhumanism. As long as you admit the question of immortality and AI are questions which have no meaning, there is no problem of transhumanism. It's a false problem. Second point, I want to refer you to an example, an anecdote that happened to me during a training. I was giving a course on vigilance about piloting a plane, and the participants of the training can calculate. And during this discussion, I don't know how it happened, one of the participants said, oh, one day there won't be any more pilots, no human pilots. But I replied, I said, if there's no human pilots, I will not get into that plane. And this is what he answered, and it's a big problem for technology. This person is an engineer who just conceives this system, and he said, you will not know it. You will not know it, that we are going to take away the human pilots. You will not know it, because we engineers, we know that you are so fragile psychologically that we shouldn't tell you. So we're going to take the pilots out of the cockpit, but we're not going to say it. And listen, this is what's going on at the moment in aviation world. We are in a world where we are taking away the humans to all the systems of piloting, real or symbolic. We are taking away the humans of all the systems on the basis of presupposition that humans are failing. So I'm asking a question because, sorry, can you still hear me? I'm not sure. Oh, thank you very much. Therefore, the presupposition is humans are failing, yeah? Whether they replace the pilots or whether they are the users. But when you say such things, to presuppose this, to pre-assume this, we are not taking into consideration that indeed, who conceives the systems, they are humans. These engineers are humans, and these engineers design these systems. They dream. They pre-assume that the machines are just a source of efficiency, which is much more efficient than humans. But we forget that machines are fallible. You cannot encode the real in advance into the machines. This desire of encoding the reality into machines in a way that we would create unfallible machines, it's a human dream. It's not a machine dream, because machines do not dream. For aviations, you know the disaster of the two Boeings which had a system SASS. They were supposed to be unfallible so that the planes were not supposed to go down. So these two disasters are from a failing system. And there was a confusion that the system believed it went up, but it went down. So the system is supposed to replace pilots which are not even trained to unplug the system if it's failing, and who are not even informed that the system is embedded in the piloting system of the plane. So humans are failing, but those who think that humans are only failing are themselves humans, and they are failing humans. So we need to recognize that we are both fallible, but a source of flexibility that machines do not have. We do introduce flexibility inside the machines that we are making. So I won't go too deep into it. Third point, when robots calculate or combine our preferences from our browsing on the internet, thanks to the big data, and that we are identified according to our preferences that we expressed while our browsing, well, we are reduced to what we already have done. We are reduced to what we have already searched on. And we receive potentially, if we are not critical, we only receive elements or preferences we have already expressed. So it means that internet users all around the world are potentially reduced to their past experiences. And in this background, the power introduced by algorithms within the systems makes that this power has a power to reduce us to what we have been. So that means there is no more future. And that's an extremely grave problem, serious problem. If we let them manipulate us, and it's very important. Critical thought is so important. If we not take a step back and we look at what do they offer to us, whether it's through tablet, telephone, computer, we will be reduced to this, to what we've already done. And our humanity will be destroyed because humanity is the unknown. It's not an experience which has already been done on the internet. Humanity is the real future. And Hannah Arendt, who was already quoted by Pierre Giorgini, she says the real future is the non-figurable, is the unknown that you do not know. The condition of modern man, the real future is our children. Because we have been children, we are the future. But if we lose consciousness of that, we will destroy the possibility of anything which will be to come. So AI, if we wish a form of eugenicism that our children are only projections of ourselves, of our times, of our present, our children would not be a real future. They would just be a duplication of our own desires. And it's according to our past experiences. So it's so important to relearn that not to learn is not a problem. It's not a fundamental problem. It's actually be in a position of learning. So it's so important to know that this ignorance is great for the future. It liberates the future. There is no AI, but there's only artificial calculations. AI will not go beyond human intelligence. Machines don't have any sense of problems, priorities. They are failables. Do not delegate them, everything to them, such as do not give them planes to fly. Against big data, humanity is made of the unknown. So we make it while we don't know what's going to happen. I hope I just was not too long, and I'm available for any more communication. Thank you so much for your thoughts. It's fine. I just remember 2 points of what you said. If we get manipulated with our critical thought, if we do not step back, we'll be reduced to what we have already done, and humanity will be destroyed, you said. I believe that here we do not want humanity to be destroyed. This is why you invite us to have a position of learning. So to step back, to have a critical thought in order to build humanity. Thank you so much, Professor. Now, I invite all participants for this discussion, which will be a little bit brief. Sorry about this. And if you have questions to you, even if it's a bit frustrating, please be quite brief when you answer the questions. Okay, first of all, I would like to start the discussion to Professor Giorgini. It's for you, Professor Giorgini. You wrote in one of your books, science must be conscientized. What do you mean by this? Oh, it's an old writing. Well, science without conscience, you know, when, as Henry Bergson says it, we reach such a level of power, and science nowadays is technoscience. It's not a transition, which is anecdotic. It's a revolution of relationship between science and technology. It's again due to knowing now that we are going. and we will do without knowing. And our last professor said we cannot repair algorithm which failed. Actually, we cannot, because they are not algorithm of programmation. They are based on simulations of correlations, but no on mathematizations of processes. So you cannot repair them. So it's clear that this awareness on technoscience and algorithm is very important, and it's nothing else by what has been said by all our speakers. Laurent Bibard, maybe you could give a reaction to what Professor Giorgini said. According to you, the thought concerning intelligence are the limits of science. Should we criticize science to build it, or should we criticize the look to science in order to build ourselves? I think it's not the science into questions, but the relationship to power and our relationship to our non-power. We are very fascinated, and I include myself in it. That's a problem for next generations. It's important to demysticize, not science, because the great scientists are very, very intelligent about it. They know, they're not blind, but we need to demysticize technology. Students believe nowadays that the notion of unloading of a brain to a computer has a meaning. We have a duty to demysticize this. We have to demystify this. We have to relearn what is the human and to understand that human pilots are not only failable, and I think that they want to generalize all this. Ms. Tanella Boni, a question on the link. You are the philosopher about relationship. You talked about relationship in order to think, etc. New technologies. In which sense do new technologies can they give a human link through humanity? Okay, we should, through these new technologies. This is what I meant at the end, but I don't think I wasn't very clear at the end. We could give some content in order to be able to diversify the types of knowledge which circulate normally on the internet, for example. So what does it mean? In Africa, for example, and on other continents, there's a lot of knowledge that could be available for everyone, but we cannot do it. First of all, because of the language, and I talked about that very briefly. But even if it's not the language, the barrier of the language, it's important to be able to diversify the types of knowledge which circulate. I think it would be a good thing for humanity. So I'm saying we know a lot of things that we cannot share with the rest of the world. However, new technologies could be tools which would be adequate, even if we know that there are many, many risks involved. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Yes, absolutely, and thank you for your answer. Roberto Lupi, how? What is the position of a human being facing new technologies in an average way, in a balanced way? What balance should we have Or how can we step back when we look at technologies as a position of authority?
It's not a simple question. It's not a quick question or a quick answer to this question. If I catch it right, I would say I don't like to. What I was talking about before is the connection between Fundament, the Bureau of the Fundament, and people who listen to the Bureau. And I don't know if we can have an impersonal component like that of algorithms, which can be the authentic bearer of fundaments. Because what is the fundament? What is the connection between an algorithm and a fundament? I don't know. It is quite difficult to think about it, but I think this is the real point of the question. And of course, I will not have an answer to this.
Père Salobir, je me tourne vers vous.
Father Salobir, I'm turning to you. You're a priest. A question was put to you. Ecclesiastes says that there's a time for everything, and the time does not belong to us. So therefore, we can accelerate it or slow it down. For you, what is time, which is necessary, indispensable to pause and to think before we act? The difficulty is the biological time is not anymore the time of the machine. And we need to ask ourselves, who is in the center of this? Is it the machine or the human being? If it's the human being in the center, the rhythm should be our collective human rhythm of our society. So I would put together the two of them. We oppose them. We could have a negative look on these technologies. And we talk about limits, but I would see a symbiosis or association. I would believe more into an incremented intelligence. We talked about the pilots. How can they be better pilots, actually, with good systems, rather than replacing pilots? That's the problem. And there's a question of time, of symbiosis and authority. And I think Max Weber said there are three types of authority. One is a transcendent authority. If we don't believe in God's authority, where will we find authority? Transcendence. If transcendence in algorithm, we really deceive ourselves. We need to look inside of ourselves some transcendence that will counterbalance this Leviathan who is external of the algorithm or the blockchain who is trying to block us. So we have to put the human being in the center. We need to master and harness again technologies. And let's have a more positive look on the technologies in order to use them. Okay. I have a question, only a last one, unfortunately. I wanted to ask a question to Tanela Boni. In Africa, somebody from the public asked this question for you. In Africa, is pedagogy of great talks is in competition with new technologies? How would you answer to this? Well, I wouldn't say it's in competition. I think that it could be absolutely complementarily done because we need them. We need them. And more we feel that it does not exist anymore, that it's in the drawers or in the memories of individuals or the old people, and that it's getting lost. But from this point of view, new technologies could be tools to reactivate or to keep these great talks.
pouvez réagir, vous, non pas seulement en Afrique, mais dans le avec le
How
regard.
do you react to this, Praise Salobir? Yes, I wouldn't put innovation, tradition. How can innovation can serve tradition? On one side, you have the know-how. The machines help us to do things quicker, cheaper, and better sometimes, certain tasks, but they don't talk about the meaning. And this is what Professor Boni said, it's about wisdom. You need time to build an anthropology, and as well transhumanism was told about, and which fell during these pandemics because so many people ended up in hospital. So all this is rather fake. We need to go back to a meaning which can be given only by the human. And I think you can use both. Thank you so much. Marilyn Parizeau, how do you react to this thought? Is it complementary or is it opposed? It's not easy to answer this one. I think both. There is some opposition, and I think there is some complementarity, and it's more difficult to implement, to put limits. We talked about limits in presentation which were made. And I think it's according to this that we should give ourselves some tools. The importance of the human and example of the planes without pilots is a great example to say we must say no. There are, for certain things, we must refuse this. We do not want planes without pilots. We in a capitalistic system of consumers. So if the consumers, speak up, if the consumers act and do not buy tickets on these planes which have no pilots, I think we can succeed. There are some elements which help us to think that we must put boundaries. And these boundaries, like Mr. Bibar said, boundaries to power, to economical power. I liked what Mr. Giorgini said on the collapse of knowledge. Yes, we need to look this in more deeply when it comes to education as well. And I think he showed some tracks in order to think more deeply on the issue of relationship to truth and to knowledge. It's a big challenge for the education of tomorrow. Thank you very much, Ms. Parizeau, and for talk about what Mr. Giorgini said. Unfortunately, my friends, we are coming to the end of our call. It's a shame we cannot go deeper than this. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your expressions. And this discussion could go deeper and deeper. And I think that our audience can go deeper and deeper. And they can read your books and listen to your conferences. Thank you so much, dear speakers. Therefore, it is true that once you think about this round table on this compass on education, all the areas show that education is very essential and fundamental, and it's urgent nowadays. However, this work hasn't been done overnight. This work on education. For more than 70 years, the ICCC is working with many efforts to think about and put the human being in the center of the world. And it's in the heart of the humanity, with its own vulnerability, that we can find strength, which is very authentic about humans. And I would like now to give the floor to three great people. First of all, Françoise Mosey, representative in Europe for Family Catholic Associations, and she will present all this work in order to get to the building of this forum. And then Christine Roche, who is the chair, honorable chair of the ICCC, and Isabelle Chaperon, vice president of ICCC, and she representative of charities at the UNESCO. They will show you the compass rose.
Je vous remercie. Donc,
Thank you. Well, I will talk about the collective works of the ICCC to organize these 3 working sessions, of which we see the end today. Well, I have to say that there are more than 70 years of work, and well, we have robustity and vulnerability, and this is at the heart of every project. Today, modernity has made us aware of the risk for the destiny of human family and the lack of balance between the faster growth of technological power and the more difficult growth of moral skills. These can be resumed in the two words. Well, first of all, the pathway of this modernity and what modernity imposes on us in terms of education. I think I can say that this modernity has a positive face. Well, humanization with a view to balancing all this in an unstable dynamic in the front of our anthropologic dimension. Then we have legal and ethic aspects. Then we have a pathway of spirituality to relieve hearts and have access to our interior dimension, respect and conservation of nature, but also of life that is received and transmitted in the incarnation, while keeping the stages, health state, the preservation of sexual fecundity through the diffusion of an effective relationship and sexual education. And the marketing of human beings is completely banned. So the development of education of girls and boys, respect, protection of workers, each of which is useful and must be considered. And last but not least, also the human development through different learnings and teaching methods for the benefit of all the societies in our common house. So this modernity asks us to submit proposals to have an educational culture. I think it's the first time we talk about educational culture with a view to being aware of the huge potential that is brought about by artificial intelligence and its use, but also the risk of unconscious subtraction in order to understand how to use these technologies, living with them without being dominated by them, and also to live our lives. The 3 working sessions, we try to cast light we try to cast light on the risks. And now I would like to talk about this compass, and in particular of the one of the compass rose. Well, this is a great progress for us. What we present today can in turn do a lot of favor and turn out to be very useful in education. Thank you. Well, as Françoise said, now we are going to talk about this Rose Compass for an educational culture. This is focused on the construction of persons in their dimension within this compass rose, so vertical and horizontal. You will have the awakening of conscience, for example, and you have for a culture of education, so you have awakening of consciousness and well, humanization in a world that is subjected by the unpredictable aspects of pandemic. Our world has to address all this in our planet. We will develop this compass rose going from north to east and then from west to north. Isabelle, you have the floor. Well, awakening of consciousness, being oneself in order to be in the world in a perspective of integral ecology, and by taking into account with lucidity the stakes of new technologies. Well, being yourself, learning to be one of the pillars of education in the UNESCO Delors report. How can we learn to become without first learning to be? To be oneself is already to get to know oneself. The idea is not new. Know thyself. And 2,500 years ago, this injunction was engraved on the temple of Delphi. Being oneself, recognizing one's real identity before inventing virtual, declarative, or even multiple identities, reading, writing, counting, speaking. These are basic skills that are absolutely necessary for living with others and acquiring a common language. Since I cannot develop everything, I will insist on speaking, since language structures a thought and a rich language allows for nuance and debate. Discern, develop a critical mind, become aware of one's limits. Awakening critical thinking is the topic chosen by the ICCC in organizing a workshop to contribute to that. So discerning the true from the false, the good from the not so good, discerning the real from the virtual or the illusion. For example, enlightening the young and the not so young about our cognitive functioning, our heuristic biases, and the manipulation of thought is an avenue to explore in order to arm them against the fake news, pseudosciences, fallacious arguments, our limits. What image of ourselves does the AI send us? That of a machine that does less well than the machine. Gradually becoming aware of our limits, recognizing our vulnerabilities and making them positive. This incompleteness is a richness without which we would have no need of the other. Adapt, stand back. Let's talk about our relationship with time, the instantaneity that AI allows competes with the time of human reflection and action. Then we have training. Who are the actors? Families, the first educators of their children, teachers, and all educators are stakeholders. From early childhood to the end of life, they themselves must be able to benefit from lifelong learning, lifelong training. Education and training go through people and are adapted to the needs and rhythm of each person. AI comes to support by proposing adapted contents, including for people with cognitive difficulties. The most important point, but it's better to remember it, that is urgent that all young people, girls and boys, have guaranteed access to quality education, as stated in the Sustainable Development Goals. The other ones, being at the world for the others, being responsible. We have reminded that consciousness and the sense of responsibility are the hallmarks of humans. AI gives the illusion of a freedom without responsibility. Educating for responsibility means encouraging to know humanities, modernities, new technologies, AI, but also to want, through commitment, volunteering, openness to free, and to power, by developing the means to act against violence, inequality, discrimination, and poverty. Developing ethics. I would like to quote Paul Ricoeur, aiming for a good life with and for others in just institutions, awaken to philosophy and spirituality, to the philosophical process as well as the different philosophies and spiritualities of the world suggest that this awakening to philosophy should not be the privilege of higher education. A recent article in, this is something that we can have also in early childhood, because we see it in younger people, and to awaken to the spiritual dimension of being, to become aware of life received, transmitted, and of death, which is not only a technical problem. So among the young and the not so young, being yourself, since we are returning to this axis, this pillar of the construction of the being, I would like to remind you of this sentence by Lebowitz. It is not the brain that thinks, it is I. Develop an inner life. Psychological interiority, the ability to build oneself by becoming the author of one's own history, the subject of what happens and not the object. Moral interiority, the ability to discern good from evil. Spiritual interiority, the realm of meaning, existential questions. And how? Silence, contemplation, wonder, open up to different cultures, discoveries, travel, arts, sports, nature, awakening to beauty. The means are many and varied, but how can we not mention these new technologies of augmented reality that allow us to visit virtually the ruins of Mosul, or restore its past splendor, or virtual tours of museums? This is just one example. Living together, opening up to difference. Listening, dialogue, debate. I would like to give you the example of a women's discussion group in Africa run by one of the ICCC member NGOs. They say in their exchanges, there is my truth, your truth, and the truth that we build together. We return to the horizontal axis, the world, in the dynamic of being oneself in order to be in the world, and building a meaning of for learning, as Daniela Boni said. So discovering, constructing a thing for teaching. So each human being has to find his or her place in the world, especially in the world of work. So education has a mission to prepare him or her for it by developing skills that are not in competition with AI, but complementary to it. This includes formal, informal, non-formal, and lifelong education. Discovering and appropriating the heritage of humanity, history, geography, science, economics, philosophy. It is a matter and the question of knowing one's roots in order to be able to invent the futures, which brings into play the process of transmission of this cultural heritage, developing self-esteem, self-worth, hope, love. It is a question of recognizing and acknowledging the unique value of each individual, whoever he or she may be, as he or she is, and of identifying his or her talents so that he or she can find his or her place as a stakeholder in society. No one should be left behind. And yet, this is one of the risks of perfecting new technologies, to awaken hope, to become aware of the beautiful energy that is love. Paradoxically, we are obliged to go back to our humanity to see if this embodies our being, that is to say, body, mind, and soul, as Francois Chain said. This was just an overview of all the dimensions that we have to go through to develop a culture of education, to learn to be. Now we are going to leave the floor to Francois Cheng, whose work is for philosophy, beauty, and spirituality.
Merci beaucoup, mesdames, Christine Roche et Isabelle Chaperon, pour cette belle présentation de la Rose des Vents, comme vous nous l'avez si bien montré, pour former la conscience afin de bien réfléchir. Et pour terminer, je voudrais maintenant laisser la parole à Stéphane de la Fouchardière, président du CCIC.
So for the chair of CCIC, he will close this webinar and to open orientations for the last few years. Indeed, I am chair of the ICCC, and I have the privilege to close this topic of human facing the new technology. So for this end, I would like to thank our speakers coming from Rome, Berlin, Montreal, Ivory Coast, Paris, and other cities. Very interesting debates of high quality, which deserve to be reviewed and re-listened and reanalyzed. And on YouTube, on replay, we're thinking about other supports for the future. We'd like to thank UNESCO, which accepted to sponsor this forum and which intervened very actively for our sessions. Lastly, thank you to the whole ICCC team and NGOs of this platform who worked for many months, especially Christine Roche, who initiated it, and Marc Toillier, who coordinated and led the project with great professionalism, rigor, and diplomacy. Thanks to Artea, our partner for communication and filming of webinars. Thank you to Vianney Malin, Guillemette Sordet, and Benoît Joseph Postic, who is our young director. And three of them managed very well for manage our imagination and our patience. And very briefly, I would like to come back to this compass that close our debate and help us to think about the future. We can be impressed by the richness of the debates on knowledge and awareness. We thought a lot about this. And for me, I remembered this famous play from Shakespeare, Hamlet, to be or not to be, to be or not to be. This is our debate to all of us in any circumstances, in our personal life, in our families, in our companies, the new technologies, to be or not to be, in a noble sense of the word. Everything is said. This compass represents the foundation of every education, to be and to live. With this rose compass, the ICCC wants to carry on this journey by organizing new meetings that will help between the project for education of Pope Francis, and those of UNESCO, but as well a bridge for us and to awaken our consciousness. But I would like to finish with a short poetry of Tonella Boni, who may be still listening to us. I am here at the door of the longest day, where it's so clear for me, my reason refutes the secular obvious clarity which separates humanity in uneven portions. Humanity is so divided and so ill-treated, and I inherited because of my invisible skin, and this skin gave me everything. I'm very proud of my skin, the skin of a woman, and I do what I want with my head, and the head is only a small part of myself, and it's from Women's Memories by Tonella Boni. Thank you very much, Miss Tonella Boni, and thank you to all. See you soon.